I was sitting on my porch in rural Georgia when I noticed the survey crew on my back 40 acres, and something about the way they kept glancing at their equipment and shaking their heads told me trouble was brewing. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I had inherited 200 acres of prime land just outside of Savannah from my grandfather 3 years ago. The property was beautiful, mostly wooded with a small creek running through it, and I lived in the original farmhouse that sat near the road. The back portion of my land was undeveloped, exactly how I wanted it. I worked remotely as a software engineer, so the peace and quiet suited me perfectly. I had no interest in selling, no interest in developing, and definitely no interest in dealing with the suburban sprawl that had been creeping closer to my property over the past few years. The survey crew was there for 2 days before anyone bothered to explain what was happening. On the third day, a woman in her mid-40s with an aggressive blonde bob haircut and designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my truck payment pulled into my driveway. She was driving a white Mercedes SUV that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt. I watched from my porch as she stepped out, her heels clicking on my gravel driveway, which seemed like an impractical choice, but what did I know? "Hello," she called out with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I'm Patricia Cunningham, president of the Magnolia Heights Homeowners Association. I wanted to introduce myself since we are going to be neighbors." I stood up from my rocking chair and walked to the edge of the porch. "Neighbors? Lady, my nearest neighbor is half a mile down the road. What are you talking about?" Her smile tightened. "Well, that is about to change. The Magnolia Heights development is expanding, and we have purchased the land adjacent to your property. We will be building 30 new homes, and I wanted to make sure you understood the community standards we expect all residents to maintain." I felt my jaw clench. Community standards. I am not part of any community. This is my private property, has been in my family for generations. "Of course," Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But you see, property values are very important to us, and we need to make sure that all properties in the area maintain a certain aesthetic. That means your grass needs to be cut to no more than 3 inches, no vehicles on blocks, no outbuildings without approval, and certainly no livestock." I stared at her in disbelief. "You do realize I am not part of your HOA, right? You cannot tell me what to do with my property." She laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. "Well, technically the entire area is now part of Magnolia Heights. The county approved our expansion, and all properties within our boundaries fall under our jurisdiction." "That is not how property law works," I said flatly. "I never signed anything agreeing to be part of your HOA. You cannot just declare jurisdiction over land you do not own." Patricia's expression turned icy. "We will see about that. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the county zoning changes. Have a nice day." She turned on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes, spraying gravel as she peeled out of my driveway. I immediately called my lawyer, Tom Bradley, a guy I had known since college who now practiced real estate law in Savannah. I explained the situation, and he promised to look into it. 2 days later, he called me back with news that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, I checked the county records. The HOA filed paperwork claiming a zoning change that includes your property in their district. It is complete garbage legally, but they have some connections in the county planning office. I think someone rubber-stamped their application without doing proper due diligence. Can they do that?" I asked. "No, absolutely not. Your property predates their development by decades, and you never agreed to join their association. But here is the problem. Fighting this is going to take time, and in the meantime, they might try to enforce their rules against you. I have already filed a motion to have the zoning change reversed, but these things can take months." I thanked Tom and hung up, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. I had heard horror stories about HOAs, but I never thought I would have to deal with one. I was perfectly happy keeping to myself, maintaining my property the way I saw fit, and not bothering anyone. The next week, I received my first violation notice. It was delivered by certified mail, printed on expensive letterhead with the Magnolia Heights logo prominently displayed. The notice informed me that my grass exceeded the 3-inch maximum height requirement, and that I had 7 days to rectify the situation or face a fine of $200 per day. I called Tom immediately. "They are fining me for grass height. Can they do that?" "No, they cannot." "Save all the notices they send you. We are going to need them as evidence when we take this to court. Do not pay any of their fines and do not comply with their demands. That would be admitting you are under their jurisdiction." So I ignored the notice. My grass was maybe 4 inches tall, barely overgrown, and I was not about to let some power-hungry HOA president dictate how I maintained my own land. 7 days later, I received another notice informing me that I was now accruing daily fines and that my account was in arrears. But that was just the beginning of my problems. 2 weeks after Patricia's visit, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I pulled on jeans and boots and walked toward the back of my property where the noise was coming from. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. Construction crews were clearing my land. They had already knocked down a dozen trees and were in the process of grading the soil. I ran toward them, waving my arms. "Hey, stop! This is private property!" I shouted over the noise of the bulldozer. The operator either did not hear me or chose to ignore me. I had to physically step in front of the machine before he finally stopped and killed the engine. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" I demanded. The operator, a middle-aged guy with a weathered face, looked confused. "We are clearing lots 12 through 15. We have the work order right here." He pulled out a clipboard and showed me a document with the Magnolia Heights letterhead. "Those lot numbers do not mean anything to me. This is my property. You are on my land." His confusion deepened. "Sir, we were told this land was purchased by the development company. We are just doing our job." "I never sold any land. Who hired you?" "Magnolia Heights Development Corporation." "Look, I do not want any trouble. If there is a dispute, you need to take it up with them." "We are just the contractors." I pulled out my phone and called the police. When the officer arrived 30 minutes later, I explained the situation. The construction crew had stopped working and were standing around looking nervous. The officer, a young guy named Deputy Mills, examined the work order and then asked to see my property deed. I had the original deed back at the house, so we all walked back to my porch while the construction crew waited. I showed Deputy Mills the survey maps and the deed, which clearly showed that the land being cleared was mine. "This is a civil matter," Deputy Mills said finally. "I cannot arrest anyone because they have paperwork saying they have permission to be here, even if that paperwork is fraudulent. You need to get a court order to stop the construction." I called Tom immediately, and he promised to file for an emergency injunction. But the legal system moves slowly, and by the time we got a court date 3 days later, the construction crew had already poured foundations for 4 houses. Standing in front of Judge Marion Foster in the Chatham County Courthouse, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Tom presented our case, showing the original property deed, the survey maps, and documentation proving that I had never sold or transferred any portion of my land to Magnolia Heights Development Corporation. The lawyer representing the HOA, a slick guy in an expensive suit named Richard Vance, argued that there had been a clerical error and that the HOA believed in good faith they were building on land they owned. He presented documents showing a land purchase, but when Tom examined them closely, the legal descriptions did not match my property at all. Judge Foster was not amused. "Mr. Vance, it appears your clients have built structures on land they do not own. That is trespassing at minimum, possibly criminal fraud. I am granting the injunction. All construction must cease immediately until this matter is resolved." I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Richard Vance stood up smoothly. "Your Honor, with respect, we have already invested significant resources into these homes. The foundations are poured, framing has begun. To halt construction now would cause substantial financial hardship. We request that construction be allowed to continue while we work out a settlement with Mr. Thompson? Absolutely not, Tom interjected. They are literally building on my client's land without permission. Every day they continue is another day they are trespassing. Judge Foster thought for a moment. The injunction stands, all construction must cease immediately. However, I am setting an expedited hearing for 2 weeks from now to resolve the underlying property dispute. Mr. Vance, your clients need to bring documentation proving they own the land in question. Mr. Bradley, your client needs to be prepared to defend his property claim. Court is adjourned. I left the courthouse feeling cautiously optimistic, but Tom warned me that the fight was far from over. They are going to come at you hard, he said. HOAs do not like to lose, especially when there is this much money involved. Be careful. He had no idea how right he was. The next day, I received a visit from Patricia Cunningham again, but this time she was not alone. She brought 2 other HOA board members with her, a man named Gerald Hartwick who looked like a retired banker, and a woman named Susan Reeves who kept glaring at me like I had personally offended her. Mr. Thompson, Patricia began, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. We need to discuss a resolution to this unfortunate situation. Unfortunate situation, I repeated. You built houses on my land without permission. That is not an unfortunate situation. That is theft. Gerald cleared his throat. Now, let us all stay calm. We are here to make you an offer. We will purchase the affected portion of your property for fair market value, which we have determined to be $12,000 per acre. That is quite generous. I did a quick calculation. They had built on approximately 5 acres of my land. So you are offering me $60,000 for land you have already developed, land that will be worth 10 times that once you sell those houses. No thanks. Susan spoke up for the first time, her voice shrill. You are being completely unreasonable. We have already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into those homes. You cannot expect us to just tear them down. I can and I do, I said firmly. You should have made sure you owned the land before you started building. Patricia's face flushed red. You are making a huge mistake. We have lawyers, resources, connections. You are just one person. Do you really think you can fight us? I am willing to find out, I replied. They left in a huff, and I knew I had just made powerful enemies. But I was not about to let them steal my land, no matter how much money they had or how many lawyers they could afford. Over the next week, things escalated quickly. I started receiving violation notices daily, sometimes multiple times a day. I was cited for having a vehicle parked on my lawn, even though my truck was in my driveway like always. I was cited for having an unapproved mailbox, even though I had the same mailbox for 3 years. I was cited for noise violations because I ran my lawnmower at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. Each violation came with a fine, and the fines were adding up quickly. According to the HOA, I now owed them over $15,000. I ignored all of it, saving every piece of paper for Tom, but the HOA was not content with just sending me letters. One morning, I woke up to find a lien had been placed on my property. Tom was furious when I told him. They cannot do that. They have no legal authority to place a lien on your property. I am filing a motion to have it removed immediately, and I am also going to recommend we file a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process. The court hearing could not come fast enough. In the meantime, I decided to do something that Tom had not explicitly told me not to do. I started documenting everything. I set up trail cameras around my property, especially near the construction site. The injunction was in place, so construction had officially stopped, but I wanted to make sure the HOA was actually complying. What I discovered shocked me. Despite the court order, work was continuing on the houses. It was subtle, mostly interior work that could not be seen from the outside, but contractors were definitely still accessing the site. I captured hours of footage showing trucks coming and going, workers carrying materials into the partially built homes, and even Patricia Cunningham herself showing up to inspect the progress. I immediately called Tom and sent him the footage. They are violating the injunction. What do we do? This is huge, Marcus. This is contempt of court. I am filing a motion immediately. They just handed us a massive win. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. Judge Foster did not look happy when we convened in her courtroom. Tom presented the video evidence, and I watched Richard Vance's face turn pale as he realized how much trouble his clients were in. Mr. Vance, did you advise your clients that continuing construction would be in violation of my injunction? Judge Foster asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Your Honor, I specifically instructed them to cease all construction activities. If work continued, it was without my knowledge or approval. That is going to be difficult to prove, considering the HOA president herself was on site multiple times, Tom said, playing a clip of Patricia inspecting the work. Judge Foster's expression hardened. I am holding the Magnolia Heights Homeowners Association in contempt of court. I am imposing a fine of $1,000 per day for every day construction continued in violation of my order. Additionally, I am moving up the main hearing to this Friday. Mr. Vance, your clients need to bring every single piece of documentation related to the land purchase, and it better be legitimate. This court does not appreciate being ignored. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were turning in my favor. Tom was practically grinning. They just destroyed their own case. No judge is going to look favorably on them now. But Patricia was not done fighting. That evening, I got a call from my insurance company. Apparently, the HOA had filed a claim against my homeowner's policy, alleging that I had damaged HOA property. It was completely fabricated, but I had to spend hours on the phone explaining the situation to my insurance adjuster. Then, my internet service was mysteriously disconnected. The service provider claimed they had received a cancellation request, but I had made no such request. It took 2 days to get it restored, and in that time, I nearly missed an important work deadline. My mailbox was vandalized, spray painted with obscenities. When I filed a police report, Deputy Mills took the report but told me proving who did it would be nearly impossible. The harassment was constant, and it was clearly coordinated. The HOA was trying to make my life so miserable that I would give up and sell them the land just to make it stop. But I am stubborn, probably too stubborn for my own good, and there was no way I was backing down. Friday arrived and the courtroom was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the case, and several local news outlets had sent reporters. I spotted a camera crew from one of the Savannah TV stations setting up in the hallway outside the courtroom. Judge Foster called the court to order, and Tom began presenting our case. He walked through the chain of title for my property, showing that it had been in my family since 1947. He presented the original deed, signed by my great-grandfather, as well as every subsequent transfer within the family. He showed survey maps that clearly delineated my property boundaries, including the land where the HOA had built their houses. Then, it was Richard Vance's turn. He presented the documents the HOA claimed showed they had purchased the land. But as Tom cross-examined, the whole scheme started to unravel. The land description in the HOA's purchase documents did not match my property. It was close, but off by several degrees and chains in the legal description. Tom had hired a professional surveyor who testified that the land the HOA thought they bought was actually a different parcel entirely, one that did not even exist due to an error in the county's GIS system. So you are telling me, Judge Foster said slowly, that the HOA purchased land based on faulty data, never verified the actual boundaries, and then built homes on property they never owned. That appears to be the case, Your Honor, the surveyor confirmed. Richard Vance tried to argue that it was an honest mistake, that the county's error had led to the confusion, and that his clients had acted in good faith. But Tom was relentless. Your Honor, even if we accept that the initial error was honest, The moment my client informed the HOA that they were building on his land, they should have stopped and verified the boundaries. Instead, they doubled down, continued construction even after a court injunction, and engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment against my client. This is not good faith. This is willful misconduct. The judge called for a recess to review all the documents. We waited for over an hour, the tension in the courtroom thick enough to cut. When Judge Foster returned, her expression was grave. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented, and I find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Thompson. The Magnolia Heights Homeowners Association has built 4 residential structures on land owned by Mr. Thompson without permission or legal right. Furthermore, the HOA violated a direct court order by continuing construction during the injunction period." Patricia Cunningham stood up, her face red. "Your Honor, what are we supposed to do? We cannot just tear down 4 houses. You should have considered that before you started building, Miss Cunningham. However, I am going to give you options. Option 1, you immediately tear down all structures on Mr. Thompson's land and restore the property to its original condition. Option 2, you negotiate in good faith with Mr. Thompson to purchase the land at a price fair to him, not to you. If you cannot reach an agreement within 30 days, option 1 becomes mandatory. This is outrageous." Patricia shrieked. "Those homes are worth over $2 million combined. Then you have significant motivation to reach a settlement," Judge Foster said coldly. "Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Thompson's legal fees, to pay the contempt fines totaling $14,000, and to remove any and all liens, violations, or claims against his property immediately. Any further harassment of Mr. Thompson will result in additional sanctions. Do I make myself clear?" Richard Vance pulled Patricia down into her seat and whispered urgently to her. "Crystal clear, Your Honor," he said aloud. "Good. Court is adjourned." The feeling of vindication was incredible, but I knew the fight was not over yet. The HOA had 30 days to either demolish the houses or buy the land, and I had no illusions that Patricia would make it easy. Tom and I went to lunch to celebrate, but he warned me to be prepared. "They are going to lowball you. They are going to try every negotiation tactic in the book. You need to decide right now what you actually want. Do you want the land back, or are you willing to sell at the right price?" I thought about it while eating my sandwich. The truth was, I did not really need that particular 5 acres. My property was huge, and the developed land was far enough from my house that I would barely notice the homes once they were occupied, but I was not about to let the HOA off easy after everything they had put me through. "I want them to pay," I said finally, "not just money. I want them to understand they cannot bully people into giving up their rights." Tom smiled. "Then let us make sure we negotiate from a position of strength. Those 4 homes are nearly finished. The HOA has already pre-sold 2 of them. If they have to back out of those sales and tear down the houses, they will lose millions. We can use that leverage." Over the next week, I did not hear anything from the HOA. I assumed they were licking their wounds and trying to figure out their next move. But on day 8 after the judgment, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Thompson, this is Robert Carlyle. I am the attorney representing the Magnolia Heights Development Corporation, the parent company of the HOA. I would like to discuss a settlement if you are willing." I put him on speaker so Tom, who was with me at the time, could hear. "I am listening. My clients are prepared to offer you $400,000 for the 5 acres in question, as well as an easement to access those properties from the main development road. That is approximately $80,000 per acre, well above market value." Tom and I exchanged looks. It was a decent offer, significantly more than the HOA's initial lowball, but Tom shook his head slightly. "Mr. Carlyle, your clients built 4 homes on that land. Those homes are worth at least $500,000 each, probably more. You are asking my client to sell you land you have already developed for a fraction of what you will make back. That does not seem fair." There was a pause on the other end of the line. What would Mr. Thompson consider fair? Tom wrote a number on a piece of paper and showed it to me. I nodded. $1.2 million, I said, plus removal of all HOA violations and fines, a written agreement that my remaining property will never be subject to HOA jurisdiction, and a public apology from Miss Cunningham. That is absurd, Carlyle said. My clients will never agree to that. Then they can tear down the houses, I said calmly. Clock is ticking, you have 22 days left. He hung up without another word. Tom grinned. Well played, now we wait. We did not have to wait long. 3 days later, Carlyle called back. We can do $900,000, plus the removal of all violations and the written agreement about HOA jurisdiction, but my clients will not agree to a public apology. Miss Cunningham is a proud woman. Pride comes before a fall, Tom said. $1.1 million, and the apology does not have to be public. A written apology delivered to Mr. Thompson will suffice. I will have to discuss it with my clients, Carlyle said. Another week went by. I was getting daily updates from Tom about the negotiations. The HOA was clearly panicking. They had already sold 2 of the homes, and the buyers were threatening to sue if the sales fell through. The other 2 homes were on the market and generating significant interest. The entire development's reputation was on the line. Finally, on day 23, Carlyle called with a final offer. $1 million, removal of all violations and fines, written agreement that your remaining property is not subject to HOA jurisdiction, and a written apology from Miss Cunningham, but that is our final offer. If you reject it, we will tear down the houses and sue you for damages. Tom laughed out loud. Sue us for damages? You built on his land. Good luck with that, but we will accept your offer with one additional condition. The settlement agreement must include a clause that if the HOA or any related entity ever attempts to file claims, liens, or violations against Mr. Thompson's property again, the entire settlement is void and the property reverts to his ownership. There was a long silence. Fine. I will draft the agreement. The settlement was finalized a week later. I signed the papers in Tom's office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents. The HOA wired the full $1 million to my account, and I received a tersely worded apology letter from Patricia Cunningham that was clearly written by a lawyer but signed by her. But the story did not end there. About 2 months after the settlement, I got a call from Deputy Mills. Mr. Thompson, I thought you should know that the FBI has opened an investigation into Magnolia Heights Development Corporation and the HOA. The FBI? For what? Apparently, your case was not the only one. After the local news covered your story, several other property owners came forward claiming the HOA had pulled similar stunts. In one case, they foreclosed on someone's home over unpaid fines that were completely fabricated. In another case, they seized a woman's property claiming she had abandoned it, when in fact she was in the hospital for cancer treatment. The FBI is investigating for wire fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. I sat down heavily. I had no idea. Your case broke it wide open. People were afraid to speak up before, but once they saw you win, they found the courage to come forward. I thought you would want to know. Over the next several months, the investigation unfolded. It turned out that Patricia Cunningham and several other HOA board members had been running an elaborate scheme. They would target properties they wanted, either for development or to flip for profit, and then use the HOA's power to harass the owners into selling cheaply or abandoning the properties altogether. In some cases, they had forged documents to place liens on properties. In other cases, they had bribed county officials to approve zoning changes that should never have been granted. The scheme had been going on for years, and the HOA had illegally seized over a dozen properties worth millions of dollars combined. Patricia and 4 other board members were eventually arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes. I was called to testify before a grand jury, recounting everything that had happened. It was surreal sitting in the federal courthouse in Savannah, telling my story to a room full of strangers. But it felt good knowing that my fight had helped expose a corrupt organization that had been victimizing people for years. The trial took place almost a year after my settlement. Patricia Cunningham, Gerald Hartwick, Susan Reeves, and 2 other board members I had never met were all convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. Patricia was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The others received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years. The Magnolia Heights Development Corporation was dissolved, and the assets were liquidated to compensate the victims. The 4 houses that had been built on my land were now owned by families who had purchased them in good faith and had no idea about the underlying dispute. I had no problem with them. They were innocent parties in the whole mess. As for me, I took the $1 million and did something I had always wanted to do. I built a proper workshop on my property where I could work on woodworking projects, something I had loved since I was a kid, but never had the space or money to pursue seriously. I also donated $100,000 to a legal aid fund that helps people fight against abusive HOAs. My life returned to normal, mostly. I still live in the same farmhouse, still work remotely, still enjoy the peace and quiet of my 200 acres. The families who live in the houses that were built on my former land turned out to be good neighbors. We wave to each other when we cross paths, and they respect my privacy. But the experience changed me. I learned that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they have more money and power than you do. I learned that the legal system, while slow and frustrating, can work if you are patient and have a good lawyer. And I learned that standing up for yourself can inspire others to do the same. I still get letters sometimes from people dealing with HOA problems, asking for advice. I always tell them the same thing: document everything, get a good lawyer, and do not back down if you are in the right. It is not easy and it is not quick, but it is worth it. One afternoon, about 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when a car pulled into my driveway. I tensed for a moment, old habits dying hard, but relaxed when I saw it was just a young couple. They got out and walked up to my porch nervously. "Mr. Thompson?" the woman asked. "I am Sarah Winters, and this is my husband Jake. We bought one of the houses on your former property. We wanted to come by and introduce ourselves properly." I stood up and shook their hands. "Nice to meet you. Everything going okay with the house?" "It is great," Jake said. "We love it. But we wanted you to know that we did some research after we moved in and we learned about everything that happened. We feel terrible that you had to go through all that." "Not your fault," I said with a shrug. "You are innocent parties in the whole mess." "Still," Sarah said, "we wanted to thank you. Because of your case, the HOA was dissolved. Now we own our homes outright without some power-hungry board telling us what color we can paint our shutters or how tall our grass can be. You did us a favor without even knowing it." That made me smile. I am glad something good came out of it. We chatted for a while, and they turned out to be nice people. They were both teachers at a local elementary school, and they had bought the house because they wanted to start a family and needed more space. They invited me over for dinner sometime, and I actually took them up on it. It was strange how things worked out. What started as a nightmare scenario with an insane HOA building on my property had turned into a $1 million settlement, the exposure and prosecution of a criminal enterprise, and ultimately, me gaining good neighbors instead of being subjected to an oppressive HOA. Tom and I stayed in touch, and he eventually got so much business from people fighting HOAs that he opened a specialized practice focusing exclusively on HOA law. He told me that my case had become somewhat famous in legal circles and was being studied in law schools as an example of property rights versus HOA overreach. The county also made changes to prevent similar situations in the future. They implemented new procedures requiring multiple levels of approval before any zoning changes affecting private property could take effect. and they added mandatory notifications to property owners when any claims or liens were filed against their land. I sometimes drive past the entrance to what used to be Magnolia Heights. The fancy sign with the subdivision name has been taken down, and the neighborhood is now just a collection of streets with houses. No HOA, no ridiculous rules, just people living their lives. It is what a neighborhood should be. Looking back on the whole experience, I do not regret fighting the HOA, even though it was stressful, expensive in terms of time if not money, and occasionally scary. I could have rolled over and accepted their initial lowball offer, or I could have just given them the land to avoid the hassle. But standing my ground was about more than just the money or the property. It was about principle. My grandfather always told me that land is precious, and once you give it up, you never get it back. He taught me to value what I had and to protect it. When Patricia Cunningham rolled up to my house in her white Mercedes and tried to tell me what to do with my own property, something in me snapped. I knew I had to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been bullied by an HOA that thought it was above the law. The trail cameras I set up during the dispute are still there, now just helping me monitor wildlife rather than construction crews. I have gotten some amazing footage of deer, wild turkeys, and even a black bear that wandered through last fall. The land is healing from the construction damage, and the trees I planted to replace the ones that were knocked down are growing steadily. Every time I walk my property, I pass by the area where those 4 houses now stand, and I feel a sense of satisfaction. Not because I won or because I got paid, but because I stood up for what was right. The families living there are happy. The criminal HOA board members are behind bars, and my property rights are secure. I never wanted to be someone who fought a big legal battle or made news headlines. I just wanted to live quietly on my land and be left alone. But sometimes life puts you in situations where you have to choose between convenience and principle, and I am glad I chose principle. The experience also taught me something about community. Real community is not about uniform grass height or approved paint colors or mandatory dues. Real community is about respecting each other's rights and boundaries, helping each other when needed, and minding your own business otherwise. The families who live in those 4 houses understand that, and we have a better relationship as neighbors than I ever would have had under an HOA regime. Tom retired last year, saying that fighting HOAs for 2 decades had been enough for one lifetime. At his retirement party, he gave a speech where he mentioned my case specifically, calling it the one that restored his faith in the legal system. He said that seeing a regular guy stand up to a corrupt organization and win reminded him why he became a lawyer in the first place. As for me, I am still here, still working remotely, still enjoying my coffee on the porch every morning. The lawsuit, the settlement, the criminal trial, all of it feels like something that happened to someone else in another life. But the lessons I learned stuck with me. I learned that documentation is everything. Those trail cameras and the meticulous records I kept of every violation notice, every threatening letter, every interaction with the HOA made the difference between my word against theirs and having hard evidence. I learned that good legal representation is worth every penny. Tom was not the cheapest lawyer, but he knew property law inside and out, and he fought for me like I was his only client. I learned that patience is crucial. I wanted immediate resolution, immediate justice, but the legal system does not work that way. It took months of hearings, motions, and negotiations to reach a settlement, and then another year for the criminal case to conclude. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for yourself can have ripple effects you never anticipated. I fought for my property rights, but in doing so, I helped expose a criminal organization that had been victimizing people for years. The dozen or so other property owners who came forward after my case was publicized got their properties back or received compensation. That would never have happened if I had just accepted the HOA's initial offer and moved on. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not noticed that survey crew on my back 40 acres, or if I had ignored Patricia Cunningham when she showed up to lecture me about community standards. The HOA would have finished those houses, sold them, and moved on to their next victim. They would still be operating today, still bullying property owners, still forging documents and bribing officials. But I did notice, and I did not ignore it, and that made all the difference. Not just for me, but for a lot of people. The woodworking workshop I built with the settlement money has become my favorite place on the property. I spend hours there making furniture, carving, and just working with my hands. It is therapeutic, especially after spending so much time during the lawsuit dealing with lawyers, courts, and legal documents. There is something satisfying about taking a piece of raw wood and turning it into something beautiful and functional. I made a dining room table for Sarah and Jake as a housewarming gift. They were so touched they almost cried. It felt good to create something positive from a situation that had been so negative for so long. Life has a way of working things out, even when it seems impossible. When I first saw those construction crews on my land, I thought my peaceful existence was over. I thought I would be fighting the HOA forever, or worse, that I would lose my family's land. But by standing firm, gathering evidence, and trusting the legal process, things worked out better than I could have hoped. The sunset from my porch is just as beautiful as it always was. The creek still runs through my property, the woods are still full of wildlife, and the farmhouse still stands solid and proud. Some things never change, and I am grateful for that constancy. People ask me sometimes if I would do it all over again, knowing how stressful and time-consuming it would be. My answer is always the same: absolutely. Some things are worth fighting for, and property rights are one of them. If we let organizations like the HOA trample over individual rights without pushback, then we all lose something precious. I still get the occasional letter from someone dealing with HOA issues, and I still give the same advice. Stand your ground if you are right, document everything, and find a good lawyer. Most of the time, HOAs back down when they realize you are serious about fighting. They rely on people being too intimidated or too busy to push back. When you do push back hard, they often fold. My case became part of a larger movement pushing back against HOA overreach. Several states have passed laws limiting HOA powers, requiring more oversight, and making it easier for property owners to challenge unreasonable rules or fines. I like to think that my fight contributed to that momentum. The black bear I mentioned earlier has become a regular visitor. I have named him Bruno, and he shows up every few weeks to fish in the creek. Watching him lumber through the woods, completely unconcerned with property lines or HOA rules, always makes me smile. Nature does not care about human bureaucracy, and there is something freeing about that perspective. As I sit here on my porch, typing this story on my laptop, I can see the roof lines of those 4 houses in the distance. They are a reminder of a difficult period in my life, but also a reminder that justice can prevail. The families living there are good people. The corrupt HOA board members are behind bars, and my property rights are secure. I never wanted to be someone known for fighting an HOA. I never wanted headlines or news stories or to testify before a grand jury. I just wanted to live my life in peace on my family's land. But sometimes you do not get to choose your battles, they choose you. When that happens, you have 2 options: fight or surrender. I chose to fight, and I am glad I did. The workshop is calling. I have a rocking chair I am working on, commissioned by one of my new neighbors. It is funny how life comes full circle. The same property dispute that caused so much stress ultimately led to friendships and a thriving little woodworking business. I am not trying to make a fortune from it. I just enjoy the work and the connections with people. As the sun sets over my 200 acres, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I feel content. The nightmare with the HOA is over, the criminals are in prison, and my property is secure. Life is good, and I earned that goodness by standing up for what was right. That is the real lesson from this whole experience. Do not let anyone bully you out of what is rightfully yours. Document everything, stand firm, and trust that the truth will come out. It might take time, it might be stressful, but in the end, justice has a way of prevailing. At least it did for me, and I hope my story helps someone else facing a similar situation find the courage to fight back. The porch boards creak under my feet as I stand up, stretching after sitting too long. Bruno the bear is down by the creek again, and I watch him for a while, appreciating the simple beauty of nature unburdened by human complications. This is why I fought so hard to keep my land, not for the money it represents, but for the freedom and peace it provides. Tomorrow is another day, and I will spend it the same way I have spent every day since the settlement, living my life on my own terms, on my own land, answerable to no HOA or power-hungry board president. That freedom is priceless, and I will never take it for granted again.